Welcome to Lovescopes. We are doing this recording for November and December. I wanted to put both months together to look at this energy for the month and wrap up the rest of 2025 so we can see what is going on in these 2 months as we prepare to go into 2026. So, um, for the love scopes, we look at Venus energy. I definitely want you to go back and listen to the general energy for each month um, and look at the moon scopes for each month because that gives us, other layers to discuss the energy that is happening. For November, Venus is in Scorpio as of the 6th, but then it transits into Sagittarius on the 30th. And then in December, Venus is in Capricorn as of the 24th. So, what does Venus hold for us? Well, I like talking about Venus because it helps us with our relationships, not only just our relationships with ourselves, but our relationships with others. And I'm using astrology to help us to better our relationships um, and better our sense of community as well. So, Venus and as I have this conversation, I want you guys to get less into having an understanding of a specific alignment, but more like how does this information translate and how can I go back into my community and use this information, or how can I, better use this in my home. So we got Venus in Scorpio. That there's when you have Venus in Scorpio, there's these like deep-seated desires, deeper emotions. It's almost like walking off a plank in the depths of the ocean, right? You don't know how deep it is, you don't know how dark it is. Pluto is the ruler of Scorpio, and so there's usually like a level of intense under the surface transformation that is going on whenever we have Scorpio energy anywhere around. Now, Venus in Scorpio it is kind of in this harder aspect with Jupiter and with Pluto during the course of its transit. And it starts out the transit in house 4, which wants us to have peaceful home lives and, you know, finding out where there's balance in our homes. But then Venus and Scorpio is kind of like this deep, like it's almost like an emo baby, right? Like when I was growing up, we had the emo kids who were a little bit deeper, a little bit darker. They were more intense, and it was all good stuff, right? Like that's not a negative thing. But this Venus and Scorpio transit is going to want us to take a more introspective look at our relationships and how we show up in those relationships, because how we show up in relationship is actually a choice to do that. Um, it's going to be square Jupiter and Cancer. Jupiter and Cancer has a big heart. So we've got to be careful not to overextend ourselves in our relationships. Um, and then it is going to be square Pluto, where there's these um, Pluto in Aquarius, where there's these intense emotional highs and lows that we may be experiencing in our relationships. And that's fine because we are at a time where feelings are all over the place. People like feelings are just everywhere, and so there may be some days where you're with it and some days where you're not with it, and you're just like, I don't know what to do, I don't know how to handle this. And so this is going to be really a time where we have to check ourselves. What do you have emotional capacity to handle? If you don't have emotional capacity to handle certain relationships, then you need to be able to have the ability to say that I don't have the emotional capacity to step into this deeply. I don't have the emotional capacity to have any depth right now, but I really need companionship. I don't have the emotional capacity right now, but I would love to just kind of like go out and have random conversation. That lets people know where you are and what to expect. And if at any time things change because you're working on yourself, because you're developing, because you're evolving, then you have the ability to let people know, like, hey, there's this measure, the things have changed. I was here and now I'm here. And I think all of that is super important in our relationships. So we're not overextending ourselves. So we're not placing ourselves in spaces that really aren't going to be helpful or healing for us. Now, as Venus moves into Sagittarius, it is in opposition to Uranus and Taurus, but also trine Jupiter, Saturn, and Neptune, which all Jupiter, Saturn, and Neptune are all in water signs. So you've got Venus in Sagittarius as fire. That shows up initially in house 5, where we're looking at our joy and our affections and our passions. And then there's this space where we need to find balance in our connections. There may be, you may have jumped a little too deep into something and now you're feeling constricted, you're feeling suffocated. I talked in the moon scopes about proactivity instead of reactivity. Oh, this looked good because we had chemistry, and now I'm in it and I feel confined. I feel restricted. Well, you never had the emotional capacity to go into that space in the first place. So why were you there? You didn't speak clearly, you didn't speak a truth about why you showed up. You just showed up expecting to receive something instead of showing up and really saying, this is what I'm here to give. What can you give? Are we cool with this? Right? People don't want to tell the truth about those kind of things. We need to learn to increase our emotional security, but that's hard to do when things are imbalanced in our relationships, which is interesting because when we go into Venus and Capricorn in December on the 24th, it's talking about lessons in emotional boundaries, right? Because Venus in Capricorn itself is not like the most expressive, or not the most romantic per se. But it does show up in house 7, which is our house of relationships and long-term connections. But there are some harder aspects with Saturn and Neptune. So we we might have, as of November, those alignments had us kind of exploring our depths and exploring our emotional capacity and feeling those deep emotions, but possibly stepping into things that make us overextend ourselves and make us um, show up in places that we don't have the real capacity to be in. And so by December, we're like, wait a minute, I'm confused by this relationship dynamic. What are we? What are we doing here? Um, Venus in Capricorn is asking us to have more maturity in our relationships and examine our concepts of commitment and loyalty and really examine what we value. Right? Because if you value your time, if you value your self-respect, if you value relationships, you wouldn't just kind of jump into something without really, really knowing where you are and what you have capacity to give. And for so long, people are going into relationships to be served and not served, right? People are talking about spaces of service, but not how you can actually serve. It's like, what is this relationship going to do for me? And we've got to kind of come out of that um, because it's screwing up our relationship dynamics. And I've seen people also talk about the concept of like, oh, I don't have expectations when I'm dealing with people. You damn sure better. You damn sure better have some standards and some boundaries. Why would you not? Why would you just say, I'm going to go into this so I don't get hurt and just expect people to just be trash? Well, then why are you there? If you expect the person to be trash, why are you showing up? Why would you show up to a trash place? Why would you not just respect yourself and say, you know what, I'm not in a space where I have emotional capacity to see past my hurts and my pain, and so I'm just not going to show up at all. That would be what emotional intelligence looks like. That would be what healing looks like. And I feel like we have a long way to get there because we have kind of been sidetracked with all of this unhealthy information that has been masquerading as just conversation. We have it's an interesting thing to be able to watch people's conversations with their homegirls and stuff like that, or friends and special guests. It's an interesting thing to watch people have conversation about relationships. Um, but what's even more interesting is that people relate to that and think that those conversations are gospel when they're really just someone's experience. They haven't given you anything that leads you or guides you or says, hey, this is more healthy over here. And so what happens is when we have conversation about healthy things, people don't relate. And so then they don't listen because they're like, oh, I'm not there yet. The key is to get there. The key is to hear the unhealthy thing and examine the discomfort. If I hear what's healthy and it's making me squirm, I got to look at what's making me squirm so I can work through that. So when I hear what's healthy, I don't squirm. That's going to be difficult. Just with life and just stuff just falling apart all around us, people are grasping onto other people in a way that is super reactive versus like having the understanding that as we build community in this way, we have to build community with foundation and structures that are stable so we can maintain community. Like, we don't want to just build community and relationships to be self-serving. Um, and then, once we get on the other side of this, all of a sudden you just kind of let people go, or you're not paying attention to folks anymore. You're just like, you kind of go back to your own corners. We're supposed to build a sense of community that is more long lasting. And I think that part is super important for us to really grasp and understand. So, love scopes for November and December. Hope you're ready to join us in all of our conversation in 2026 coming up. If you haven't checked out the general post for November, December energy, make sure you check that out. And also make sure that you check out the moon scopes for November and December.